welcome a new vice chairman, Senator Younger. He and I met yesterday and trying to kind of get him acclimated to some of these issues. Like I explained last year to the committee, last year was my first year to chair this issue, and I learned a whole lot. I think I'm up to at least a kindergarten level on my understanding now, which fortunately on this issue puts you well ahead of the pace on most people out there. So appreciate y'all being here. And the first bill we're going to bring up, I think you've got the agenda and the bills in front of you, is Senate Bill 2124 that has to do with Department of Unemployment Security. And what this does is during the pandemic, we found out that there are some gaps in the language. One in particular that showed up was in some instances we had someone who was receiving compensation but was not physically doing any work. And so under the current statute, they were able to receive the compensation that they were getting, but still also file for unemployment benefits. And so essentially it was a situation where they were, in my opinion, double dipping to some degree. I don't think there was any malice or anything out of the ordinary in that as far as a desire to deceive, but it was a loophole that was determined. So in reference to that and a few other issues, what this bill will do is in line 649 through 659, it clarifies that a person eligible for unemployment benefits shall not include individuals receiving voluntary payments from employers, even if they are not performing work, and even if the payments are in lieu of regular wages. It also clarifies in line 669 through 672 that unemployment does not include administrative leave. So that will fix that problem so that going forward, we will not have that situation where MDES will be required to provide benefits from someone who is receiving benefits in their current employment. There are some, just as a side, there are a few issues on that I'm still looking into, and most of those have been cleared by some executive orders that the governor has put in place, but I'll continue to keep you up to date on anything I'll find on that. On lines 802 through 803, this simply allows MDES to designate someone other than the executive director with the authority to declare an employer report incorrect, assess a contribution due, or assess a penalty for non-compliant employers. During this process too, we learned from Jackie Turner that her role got stretched quite a bit as the number of unemployment claims came in, and it would be nice to allow her to kind of delegate a few of her duties to kind of share the burden during that type of crisis. In lines 843 through 849, it provides that the executive director shall have the authority to abate interest accrued on past due contributions from the employer. Again, on this is not excusing their normal payment, but in some of the employers during COVID, we've seen the interest pile up, and some of them will maybe pay the interest, but this just gives the executive director to kind of forgive that if need be, to keep them out of a deficit type of situation. And then on lines 897 through 1006, we've learned too with some of the federal money that we need some reference to the Federal Treasury Department. So you'll see through there some reference to the Treasury Department in the statute. And we added in the committee sub you have in front of you, the word if applicable. So the reason we did the committee sub was to include the words if applicable there so that we're not mandating or forcing the federal government to do something. We're just complying with that if needed. Lines 1496 through 1497 deals with one last issue called SUTA dumping. This is basically when a company might shift their name or shift to a different status to prevent having to pay a rate that has increased over time. So if a company is called kind of working around the system, they'll have a 2% penalty. That's a very detailed explanation. I'll be glad to answer any questions concerning MDES. Senator Sparks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to clarify on administrative leave because on the manufacturing side, we had several people who there certainly were not permanently separated from their job, but we are still covering them if they're sent home for 2 weeks. I think there's a week set out period normally to apply for benefits unless it's waived as it was under the executive order. But whatever the terminology is, if someone is laid off, even for a short period of time, they're still eligible to draw unemployment if they're not receiving any compensation after that week, if they're otherwise eligible, correct?
Right, and I think, to that point, COVID created a situation where, for example, in my business, we would have someone who had tested positive, and we would basically send them home, and I would continue to pay them, but they, depending on what you want to call that, because they're not physically in the office, it did open them potentially to do that. And I don't know if in the situation I'm describing, if I would call that administrative leave, but it might be interpreted in that depending on what the company is. So in answer to your question, yes, it's to fix situations where people are not eligible for payment in 2 ways.
Right, because the concern is, are you actively seeking work? And this may be getting off topic of what that actual issue was, but actively seeking work, no, I'm just laid off for 2 weeks until we get product back. So but we're just trying to keep it from double dipping, correct?
Exactly.
And then the 2%, to be very, very clear, is not an increase in any way. It is a penalty for somebody trying to basically circumvent and cheat the system.
Right, and and a specific example would be, say Company X has had a large increase in their SUTA rate because of layoffs or things they've done in the past, or any reason. It would be improper for that company to set up shop as a new company and still be doing the same thing and apply and get a new rate for a new employer instead of realizing the effect of that. So it's to keep people from working around the system.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that's a wonderful addition. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just so I'm crystal clear on this, if employer in good faith pays incorrectly or doesn't pay their unemployment taxes or whatever they are, this would give MDES the option to forgive some of that. Is that correct?
It would allow them to forgive some of the interest.
The interest accrued over time.
Right.
So if it should have been 1,000, let's just say over time it's accrued to 14,000. Just hypothetical numbers, they could reduce it by 13,000. Hypothetically.
Right, but the interest I think it's 1%. It's a small rate, maybe 1% a month if I remember correctly. So it wouldn't reach a large number like you described. And again, this is not requiring the forgiveness. It's just giving them the ability to negotiate, to try to recognize that we've been through a challenging time.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Is there a motion?
Title sufficient due pass?
A motion, title sufficient, due pass. All in favor? Oh, I'm sorry. Title sufficient, due pass. Committee 7.
Committee sub.
Committee
Excuse me,
7.
yeah.
This motion, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that bill will be recorded. And the next bill this morning is Senate Bill 2296. And just to kind of open this, everyone, just about everyone on the committee went through last year as we worked to reorganize and change the SWIB board. And as part of that process, we set up a new leader for the Office of Workforce Development. As a non-voting member of the group that has been seeking someone to fill that, what we found as a state is that it's a very highly competitive position. It requires a very unique skill set to get somebody. We worked very hard to get an applicant from a neighboring state and for several months, and were unable to get a compensation package together that was anywhere near what this person was receiving or what any other potential applicant is really asking in the situation. And so the bill you have before you basically will in part of our statute, we have an exemption. So our statute basically says that no public employee salary shall be greater than 150% of the governor's salary. But there are some exemptions. There are several positions in the state that allow exemptions. And this would add the executive director of workforce development to the list of positions that can be exempted from this. Would also allow the executive director by majority vote of the board of members of the SWIB executive board and the council to waive any portion of the salary or compensation, including state retirement benefits. So it would, just for that position, allow that person to contribute into perhaps a private retirement plan instead of the PERS plan. And again, some of the reasoning on that is we have been looking for someone from a neighboring state. This is such an important role that our look so far has been for the best person in the country and not the next person in Mississippi to fill the role. And that's still my intent, is for us to be leading from head on this. And so this would clear up that language. We thought that as a board that we could do this to some degree, but we're not certain. And so this just kind of clears it up to allow that search to continue to find the correct person. So I'll be glad to answer any question. Senator Barnett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You mentioned the fact that this individual may invest their retirement funds in a different place. Would that open the door for other state employees to feel like they are allowed to do the same?
No, this wouldn't allow them to invest that. It would just allow, in that plan for the person not to contribute in PERS. So there's not going to be an amount that would go to PERS that they're then send it somewhere else. This would allow them to, set up a different retirement compensation plan of their own, if that were something they desired. And that is something that we found is important to some of the people out there, so this comes from Patrick Sullivan, who's the chair of the SWIB board right now.
Well, I was just asking because, again, my question would be if there's any other state workers who may say, I would rather not put my money, my part of my
Right.
salary not go into PERS. I would like to do something different with it, but that might open up.
Now, this would only apply to this one particular person.
Okay, thank you, Senator.
Right. Thank you. Any other questions? We have a motion title sufficient to pass. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that bill will be reported. And one final one today. And as I open this one up, another issue we're going to discuss as we go along is we have a bill to reorganize incentives in the state that's being referred to as MFLEX, Mississippi Flexible Incentive Plan. That is not today's bill, but today's bill is a reflection of some of the problems we've determined in our incentive packages within the state. We have incentives that have become somewhat complicated. They have been hard for employers and people who are seeking to relocate to our state to understand. And so what this bill does is we had an employer in DeSoto County named Crone. Crone is a tractor manufacturer, and they applied for and got a advantage job credit to move their headquarters to Mississippi. Crone is a company that is out of Germany, and in moving to DeSoto County, they brought 90 new jobs with an average salary of $80,000, and they were granted this incentive to come here. Well, through a paperwork error, they missed the deadline by a short period, and as a result, we're not eligible to apply for the incentive that we promised them as a state. And so what this legislation does here is it fixes that loophole to allow them to apply for the incentive we promised them. Not a new incentive, it's one they asked for when they came here. And it would just specifically fix the problem for them. Going forward with MFLEX, my goal to make the incentive process a lot more transparent and easy to understand so that we are not coming back on a regular basis to fix problems. We can hopefully have a process in place where we can go forward and not have this. But that's what the bill does. I made sure in the language of this that we crafted it to make sure that it would only deal with this one specific company. And so you'll see reference in there on lines 257 through 264. I believe it mentions, just for completeness here, so solely with respect to any farm equipment manufacturer that locates its North American headquarters to Mississippi between that time frame. And I am completely unaware of anybody else company-wise that did that during that time frame. And I have double checked this with MDA to see if that does indeed fix the problem, and it does fix the problem for that particular company. So I'll be glad to answer any questions. Seeing none, for motion.
Title sufficient, you pass.
We have a motion of title sufficient to pass. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that bill will be reported. Again, the Inflex bill was double referred to finance and then to economic and workforce development. We'll have that bill, and we've got another bill that's being drafted to hopefully also eliminate some of the incentives that are not being used in the state. I expect those to come forward after we pass the general bill deadline and we move into more of the finance and appropriation deadline. So with that, is there a motion?
Rise and report.
So moved. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess Solly's on there with us, I guess.